Gregory Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mrs McVeigh. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and it is a pleasure for me to be here, as I usually respond to things in the Health Department, to hear a more rural point. But representing Farnham and Bourne, which is a semi-rural seat, it would be of no surprise to members in the House that I need to declare that I am a supporter of the Countryside Alliance and a member of the Conservative Rural Forum. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Epsom Ewell for securing this debate today and for her many expositions of very, very tragic cases, especially her powerful remarks about the appalling case of Emma and Letty Patterson. I want to thank my honourable friend for North Cotswolds for his very practical approach to this debate, and a number of the issues that he raises I think the government should take on board. Likewise, my honourable friend for Wyre Forest, discussing the synergies between gun licences and other licensing regimes, in his case a pilot. I look forward to him taking me on a trip at some point. And also to the honourable member for Tiverton and Minehead for her, as ever, interesting contributions with her rural experience. Whenever we decide to create new rules which restrict the behaviour of the many in response to the actions of the few, we must be extremely careful. Where genuine loopholes exist because of data silos or because of how long-standing rules interact with novel cases, then it is right that they are closed. Now, as has been mentioned, while the firearms marker is not mandatory, a digital version has been rolled out to all general practices in England, with implementation completed in May of 2023. Now, the key point that the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell mentioned was that the government must continue to monitor the efficacy of that current system to ensure that only those who are suitable are able to hold a fire alarm licence, and more especially to publish the data surrounding that. Now, as has been mentioned, many organisations are supportive of mandatory markers, and I have a lot of sympathy from that, but we must have that data to make an evidence-led approach to this. Protecting the integrity of the firearms licensing system is essential for public safety, but any measures must remain proportionate and avoid placing unnecessary burdens on medical professionals or responsible licence holders. As we've seen so often in recent years, the net result of successive, well-intentioned changes to the law can be a system which makes life unduly difficult for the vast majority of law-abiding people, while failing to actually stop the criminal minority. Now, unfortunately, Madam Chairman, under this government we have seen a renewed assault on civilian firearm ownership, which is set to directly punish those in rural communities who rely on firearms as tools of the trade. For farmers, land managers and pest controllers, firearms are part and parcel of everyday life, and access to these tools is vital. Without them, it would be impossible to protect livestock and to manage the local population of certain animals, as farming communities have done for centuries. Yet, without any particular justification, and without ever proving that it would actually prevent criminals from getting hold of firearms, this government has announced that it plans to regulate Section 2 firearms, like shotguns, under the more stringent regime previously applied only to Section 1 firearms. We've heard vague gestures in the direction of public safety, yet no clear case has been made for the substantive measures proposed, and we've certainly had no indication from the government that it has considered the particular needs of rural communities. If shotguns are to be regulated like long-range rifles, how does the government expect farmers and pest controllers to continue their work? And given that many police firearms licensing departments, as we have heard, are overwhelmed by the volume of applications in the area, has there been any consideration of the delays that extra work for these departments would create? Madam Chairman, one of my constituents recently submitted a renewal application within the timeframe recommended by the police, allowing more than 6 months for processing. The only response received was, by return of post, an extension of the existing licence, as the department acknowledged that it would be unable to issue a new licence within the 6-month period. The routine of use of licence extensions is concerning because it allows firearms to remain in circulation without a timely, full reassessment of suitability. Yet some of the proposals the government is going to do won't help with public safety, but will put additional burdens on the police force and will make that more likely. So has... Yes, of course.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Throughout this debate, we've talked about proportionality. And I think everybody who has spoken has agreed that compulsory medical markers would be totally proportionate to try and make the public safer. But the proposal to move shotguns from Section 2 to Section 1 is totally disproportionate. The current law was framed as it is because a shotgun is only lethal at a relatively short range, whereas a firearm, even the 2.2, if it's shot straight, is lethal at up to a mile with high-velocity bullets. They are two totally different tools of the trade used for different uses.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. He is entirely right. It seems to me that the government is taking a knee-jerk reaction without understanding both the logistics and the mechanics of the differences between long-range rifles and shotguns used by our rural communities, and, as my honourable friend says, from a sedentary position, actually see the evidence for it. And whether we're talking about medical markers or the changes to the shotgun licensing regime, the key thing is it must be done with evidence. So I ask the Minister, therefore, has there been any consideration of the disruption that these delays would cause for those in rural communities who rely on firearms for work? Have these questions been asked at all within the Home Office? Or, like so many others, has this government simply failed to consider the needs of rural communities? It is clearly true that, wherever possible, our firearms licensing rules should prevent weapons from falling into the hands of those who only wish to use them to do harm to others. But any new changes to the law must account for the fact that life in the countryside is very different to life in our largest cities. We must afford some space for discretion and for the recognition of the particular needs of certain communities. We must also be sure, always, that new rules would actually make life more difficult for wrongdoers instead of allowing good intentions to lead us into making life more difficult for the law-abiding majority. Far too often, it's the law-abiding who are punished by rules created in this place, even when those rules were designed with the most sincere intention of targeting the criminal few. So, can the Minister provide clarity on when we can expect the consultation on proposed changes to shotgun licensing, and can he assure us today that the final verdict of this consultation will take full account of those across rural Britain whose livelihoods would be rendered impossible by these proposals? And can he further assure us that before considering any new regulations, this government will first consider a renewed focus on enforcing the law as it already stands? Madam Chairman, I think there's been clear agreement in this debate for the need for a licensing system that protects the public, doesn't overburden the police or the NHS, stops and punishes wrongdoers, and recognises the special need that rural communities have for responsible gun ownership. Therefore, I urge the Minister to approach this from an evidence-based, proportionate and fair attitude, protecting the public and protecting our rural way of life.